Yeah, so to give a little background information about myself, I grew up in Southern California. I moved to Portland for a legal role at Nike. And I did what most people do when they move to a new town. They look for a place to get their hair done and facials and whatnot. And so for me, that's how I developed the vision for Glory. So originally, Glory was going to be a personalized. Actually, I should say it was going to be a facial shop where you could get personalized facials specifically for women of color. And gosh, I would share the vision with many folks and I would get various responses. Most would think about all of the overhead that goes into running a brick and mortar, all of the staff that would need, as well as equipment and everything else. And I was set out to do that. I did not care what folks would say. I was like, I'm on a mission, and we are going to open our first shop in Seattle, Washington. Yeah, did I
Yeah,
answer everything, Rick?
yeah,
Okay,
I
cool.
think that's great. That's great context for the to kick off with. And then Jonathan, tell us about you and Caravel at the
Yeah,
beginning of the year.
yeah. Hi, everyone. So a little bit of background. I grew up in central Pennsylvania. Uh, kind of moved, slowly migrated out west through Salt Lake City and then Portland. I came to move to Portland because the studio that I was running along with two other co-founders kind of got acqui-hired into White and Kennedy here in Portland. That's what brought me to the city. But my background is in user experience design, interaction design. So I love designing products and experiences, and you know, kind of the thread to get to out of the Caravel pre-2020 was did a lot of that work in e-commerce, did a lot of that work in kind of understanding what customers were looking for in your product, and trying to find ways of always incorporating that into improve the products and services. So that's a little bit of background. I think at the beginning of 2020, I couldn't tell you what we were doing because we were in the middle of the pivot.
Yeah.
But pre-2020, we were essentially a chatbot that e-commerce brands or direct-to-consumer brands, so Alisia could use it. You put it on your website, and it would act like a store associate. And it would answer certain questions, repeatable questions around orders and so forth. And that was a product that we were building pre-pivot. So
Cool. So you're kind of going forward with your startup ideas. Suddenly, what is now probably 4 to 5 months ago, the entire world changes. Alicia, what are you doing today? Like, what is your post pivot company, and what's the focus of Glory?
Yeah, so, again, like initially when we had decided to focus on having brick and mortar stores, I thought, well, let's start with a digital presence. And I simply had like a landing page. And the thought was, is I was going to have this email list of those that were interested in coming into a Glory shop. And then once we had gone through, this pandemic, the thought was is like, oh wow, like a lot of our competitors are having to close down their stores and lay off many of their skin experts. And so really we had to think of a way in which we could still, grow and get customers and still meet the need or still meet the vision that we set out for Glory. And that vision really is to make women of color at the forefront of beauty and skincare because they have been underserved for so long. And the thought is we can do that by giving her guidance on what skincare products to use, as well as give her access to skin experts. And so we thought, hey, well, now is the time to really build out this digital platform. And how we can go about doing that is having this MVP. So we thought to create a subscription box, which I never would have thought it would get to where it is today. Just only, like, I don't know, it launched in early June or late, yeah, like late May, early June, and here we are today. So it's been really, really exciting to see how, you know, taking a leap of faith and making that pivot has actually been, you know, just so pivotal in our business model and has allowed us to grow. So yeah, really, really excited.
That's awesome. Jonathan, I think what I really respected about you and your team were your willingness to kind of try different things. You were always kind of in mid-pivot or thinking about pivots. Was the pandemic like a huge effect for you, or was it more your experience going through accelerators and testing with customers and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say the pandemic had probably had the least effect on our pivot. Definitely it's something that now and gosh, it's been 4 months, but it's definitely not something that we're unaffected by, but it wasn't a precursor to us pivoting. The accelerators did help, and I can share a little bit of detail of how they helped. So going through PIE, and then we were fortunate to go through Techstars as well, have both of those. But really our pivot story started towards the end of November of last year. And you know, you're right, we kind of took that time to kind of really deeply reflect the product that we had in market. And we spent a good amount of time looking at it, my co-founder Max Foley and I, looking at all the different factors, everything from like our sales cycle to the market, to where we would be going, where we would need to be going. So it wasn't necessarily like there was an event that we had that forced us to change. It was really just like evaluation of were we on the right path. And once we made that decision that this path is probably not as viable as we think or hope it will be, then we kind of went in search of, okay, well, what is the pivot that we're going to make? We did scale a lot of different factors, from changing the business completely. I think we even, one of our engineers, Dave, built a quick web chat interface because we were thinking about going into web chat, which in a COVID world actually is, you know, maybe beneficial, but we had that time to just explore. But ultimately, we came back to taking a look at the previous product and just trying to really understand and examine what worked well. And that was kind of the foundation for what we're doing now. And then to just highlight those accelerators, I think an accelerator like PIE and Techstars force you to they kick you in the butt to do the work, and not necessarily force you to make a decision faster, force you to do the work to make the decision faster, and we benefited quite a bit from that. But yeah, I think to wrap that up, I think COVID it's more playing a role in how we operate now within this new pivot than changing us.
Okay. Staying with you, Jonathan, maybe talk us through, because there are product pivots, there are market pivots, there are positioning. Like, take us through all the kind of decision factors that you and your team were addressing as you made that decision.
Yeah, sure. So back in November, I think the big ones for us were just is our product solving a need? And I think any founder might have had this conversation with maybe an investor or another founder, where is your product the advantage of them, and almost to the point where, like, I'm kind of sick of hearing that in some cases. But I think that forced us to look at, you know, what problem we're solving, and was that problem big enough for people to immediately put money down for it in terms of your customers. And so we looked at the sales cycles that we were having. We looked at things through lenses of product market fit. And again, some of these are difficult because you might have a limited customer base, like we do, depending on your business. We talked to our customers to understand, like, what value we were providing. And then I think the other big one was just where we were in the market. So our previous product relied very heavily on automation and using AI, specifically machine learning and natural language processing, to be able to automate these conversations that you would have with a brand. Our customers were telling us that they want to be able to jump into that and have an interface to interact. And when we really kind of looked at what that would take, it meant that we would be building a lot of the tools that had already been built many times over from companies like Gorgeous or Zendesk or Intercom. And the market felt like we were coming at it from automation and having to build a ton to expand out. And they were coming in from all of that into automation. And so, I think the market and just the general sales cycle were some of the big factors that made us re-examine.
Yep. Yep. Alicia, I know this is something because we've had conversations about it, and I've had similar conversations with other founders. Sometimes there's a reticence or an emotional struggle with the pivot. You know, you made promises to customers, you told people this was the story, and now you're changing the story. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process in working through that?
Yeah, certainly. I think you're so right. I think I had this emotional attachment to our original vision. And, in all honesty, I don't know if I would be where I am now had it not been for this pandemic, in the sense that I was, really focused on having brick and mortar stores. I think it's the experience that the customer has with meeting someone in person and having, being able to relax and have someone service them with the skincare products. I think that is an experience in itself. But what I found is as I was in a place really where it was like either, you wait to see what you're going to do with your business model, which I don't think is smart, or you think quickly. So I think for me, really, it was, the first 2 weeks I was really in a rut. I was like, what am I going to do with Glory? I have this list, this customer base, a small list of folks who are interested in Glory, and I've already shared so much about what we plan on doing, and so I didn't want to let those people down. But at the same time, I also recognize that this is definitely very different times that we're all experiencing. And I think if anything, people are more open to change now than they ever were before, right? And so I think for me, it was a matter of, okay, well, how do we make this transition quickly, but then also how do we communicate to those folks, to those customers, about where we're going? And so once we decided we were going to make that pivot, I think the next thing is like, how are we going to communicate this to our customers and to mentors and friends and everyone else who who are rooting for us.
And how did you go about that process? Like, what was the first thing you did?
Yeah, so actually, I around that time I had received a scholarship through Eureka. It's this founders program, and I had received 6 mentorship sessions. And so I met with this woman, Natalie, who is now my mentor, and we were just coming up with various ideas for like how we can make this pivot. And so I had brought up the idea of subscription boxes, and then we kind of just went full-fledged with that. And what I found was that if I'm going to make a business decision, it really we should always go back to what was our mission, like what are our values for Glory, and what is our mission, like what are we actually setting out to do. And I had shared already with you like what our mission was, and so if it aligns with that mission, then let's move forward and do it. And so we felt as though the subscription box, although a very different model, it still serves our customer base and still meets our mission, which is to provide her with guidance and give her access. So then we set out to communicate this via social channels about how we're making this change. And we kind of made it cheeky about how we're, making a hashtag pivot, and how, that's the word of the year right now is making a pivot. And it was really, it was receptive. People appreciated how authentic and honest I was, in the sense that like, I don't have it all together. I don't, we're still testing this. But we would love to have you participate and join us in this journey.
Yep. Well, and that also brings up that I think part of the difficulty in making that decision as a founder is not only the way that your community or your customers might interpret that pivot, but also you personally. Jonathan, maybe can you talk a little bit about the kind of stigma associated with pivoting and how folks can work their way through that stigma?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can speak to that from just personal experience. If I could rewind the clock a year ago, I thought my understanding of a pivot always had kind of a negative connotation, like you had failed, or you had set this course and made these promises or built this product or convinced customers, your team, and then that ultimately isn't going to lead to somewhere fruitful. And so I think that there is a connotation that is a failure, and I think what it took was really this process that we've gone through over the last several months, and having, I think Alisia pointed out, like having mentors and other people to talk to who have gone through it. You kind of quickly realize like pivoting is progress in most cases. There's still an art to doing it right, and there's still a gamble, and we'll probably pivot in some variation of something in the future. But that was something that was just kind of, I think, was feeling that through our pivot. And then I remember one of our mentors just said, like, pivoting is progress. It means that you found what didn't work, and now you can move on to something that does work. And I think that that kind of stigma and then kind of washed away quite a bit. And it also depends on the type of pivot. If you're completely changing everything about the company, then I think there's more to kind of acknowledge. But if it's pivoting a little bit of like what your product does or so forth, like there's different magnitudes of it as well. But that was a big change, I think, this last year.
Yeah, and I think in my experience with founders, that's the hardest kind of emotional thing to deal with, is that yes or no is really just a data point, or the direction you're going or the way the market is responding is data that you should be using to make these decisions. But so often you're emotionally wrapped up in what you're doing, as you should be, but it makes those decisions much more difficult, I realize, from the founder standpoint.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit to that, I think the jump or pivot from something without kind of the research or without like an opposing force, maybe something like COVID, like those are scary leaps. But if you can center yourself in a new direction you're going and reinforce that with, hey, our customers actually would much rather have this, or this could be more fruitful, or we could actually build this, then I think those are the things that, at least personally, I feel like get me over that anxiety, or just help convince me more that this is the right path. So if you're thinking about pivoting, kind of that work to do to kind of figure out if this next thing's going to be fruitful, that helped me get over the anxiety of it.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's a great segue into one of the first questions from folks. And folks, feel free to submit questions using the Ask a Question button down at the bottom, or you can just pop in there and upload the questions you like. The question currently at the top of the list is for Alisia. What kind of testing were you able to do before your subscription box launch, or were you confident that that was a direction that had potential kind of right out of the gates?
Sure. So a few weeks before we launched the subscription box, we did have products for sale. So we had partnered at that time. I think we had partnered with 8 female or women and minority-owned skincare brands, and so we had their products for sale. So essentially, we had like this marketplace, so to speak. And so we were able to test to see like what products were most popular and what was really resonating with the customers. As far as this, so we had some data around that. And then we also did have data from our skincare profile. What we found is that, I think overall we have about a 40 or 45% completion rate on our skincare quiz. And so women want to know like what products are right for them. And so with that, I thought that was a great segue to then have the subscription box where it was personalized and curated based on the customer's responses to the quiz.
Mhm. Hopefully that answers your question, Emily. If not, feel free to clarify and we'll get some more detail for you.
Yeah.
Maybe throw this one to Jonathan. How and where did you communicate your pivot or change to your customers and prospects? What was your strategy for doing that?
Yeah, so I'll start with maybe customers, and when we started the kind of thinking about a pivot that would ultimately lead to sunsetting Caravel pre-2020, we didn't really, our customers were using the product and we were there for them through customer support or answering questions, but for the most part, we kind of treated it as normal because our product we could run without a lot of hands-on. So as we were doing the pivot over the last several months, when we got to the point where we knew this new direction was going to be what we were focused on, and it was much different from the chat bot, we kind of examined, tried to put ourselves in their place to understand, okay, if I just learned that this piece of software that I had on my website was no longer going to be around, what would I want? And what we did was we crafted just a, hey, this is what's happening, this is why we're doing it. We also think that you could be great customers of this new product, so we'll talk about that. But essentially, here are the things that we'll do to make this really easy. And we're going to give you, 60 days time. I'm going to come back to you in day 50 to kind of talk about how we can help you get this off of your platform, because there's a little bit of technical know-how. So just try to offer them, make that really easy. We had a handful of customers, so we could do that and still stay focused with our business. It might have been different if we had on a larger scale. But that's essentially it. Just, I think with your customers, just try to understand what's the worst that can happen if they can no longer use your product. Be very authentic with reasons why you're changing it. Give them a date and give them a lot of structure for them to make decisions, and just kind of trust that that they'll be positive about it. And so far, the reactions were really positive. They were really interested in hopeful of what we were doing next, and it turned out really well.
Well, and I think one of the nice things about pivoting at such an early stage is you're generally dealing with early adopters anyway, and early adopters love shiny new objects and new things to muck around with anyway. So yeah, it could be a little lower bit of a barrier than somebody who's been a paying customer for the past, 3 years, and you're suddenly changing the product direction on them. I'd love to hear both of your takes on this. Jonathan, we'll just start with you since we're talking about the team. A pivot can impact employee morale and engagement. What strategies did you use to manage that change and uncertainty for folks? And maybe Alisia, talk about it. You can talk about it from a partner standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I would say that the next year, is this pivot going to work? The second great question that I know Max and I had was, is how do we bring our team through this pivot, or how do we all kind of come out the other side of this, and are we all right to come out the other side of this? Because you're changing drastically what you're doing, you kind of have to reassess, do we have the right team and everything in place? And I think our strategy, I'll maybe back up a little bit. One strategy I think when you're in early, as an early stage startup, everyone that you bring on, whether it's a partner, another founder, or your first set of employees, you really have to believe in what you're doing, but also believe that things can change and they're okay with things changing. And that might mean that your software engineers have to be okay with throwing out code because we're moving these things. And there's so much volatility that I think your first couple hires really try to suss out if they can kind of work in that environment, because I think that if they can't, that leads to a lot of different tactics and maybe becomes your pivot much harder. And we fortunately, when we decided to pivot, we had 3 employees who were really game for that and really just 100% behind it, and so grateful to have that. So when we decided to pivot, I think the first thing I would say was are you good with the pivot? Because if you're not, or you're not really into it or passionate about it, that's only going to trickle down into everything else that we do. So Max and I were very much excited about where the new prospect could go with what we found through that process. And then we went to the team and just made a case around, hey, this is why we're feeling this isn't working. This is why we think this new direction is going to be potentially much better. Here are the reasons why. We just asked that here's an open forum if we want to debate this or ask questions. And we're not asking you to make a decision right now. Sit with it, because we've had that time to kind of sit with it. But I think you really have to kind of come off authentically and make a case for it. And if you're just kind of someone advised us that, like, take your time to understand the decision you're about to make, but once you make that, move very quickly to kind of change things and get things going. So I think that was the biggest tactic, was just explaining very authentically why you think this is the right move. What do you think it means? Just put in the work to kind of figure out. And we were fortunate to do a lot of customer development while we were trying to understand the pivot. So we could come back and say, hey, look, like, we're having these really great conversations. We think the product can move more into understanding customer feedback. Here are all the people that were really excited about that, and that got everybody on board, because your early employees want to build something great with you, and if you can show them there's a better path, in most cases they will be on board.
That's great. That's great advice. And Alisia, similar from a partner standpoint, right? Like, people have joined on your journey with a specific kind of idea in mind. How do you manage that relationship and some of the uncertainty it might cause with partners?
Yeah, it's interesting because most of our partners, we've really developed this, we've developed this really great rapport with one another. I feel like they're friends now, which is great. And so when we decided to make this this pivot, I reached out to each partner directly and spoke to them and shared, what our vision was. Some were, I think because we've developed this great rapport, they were extremely candid and honest about their feedback. And so some of them actually thought, well, how, do you plan on just doing the subscription box and not selling, products individually as well? Like, what are we going to do? And so just to give you some background information, we not only have the subscription box, but we also do drop ship model as well, where customer purchases the products and then our partners fulfill those orders. So that way we don't have to purchase tons of product and have, tons of this inventory just sitting. So some of the partners were concerned with whether we were going to change that business model. And I'm glad that they actually shared their feedback, because initially, I thought, like, let's only do the subscription box. Like, that is it. And I'm glad that I actually listened to them and really reevaluated, how that may impact our customers. And so currently right now you have either option. You can purchase the products individually, or you can purchase the subscription box. And I think it's a great way, because some customers can actually try out the products first before they decide to purchase a subscription box. So all to say, I'm glad that I had already built this strong relationship with our partners where we could have this open, honest conversation. And that way they could provide their feedback, and that I then actually assessed it and evaluated it, and then made that decision to move forward with having both options for customers.
What I'm hearing from both of you is the transparency and the strength of these relationships. Can you maybe provide some tips for folks, Jonathan, from a digital product perspective? I think I'd be really interested, where so much of this activity has to happen online now and over Zoom calls, and it's not a sit down face to face. Like, how did you go about building that kind of rapport with your customer base?
Yeah. So for this new product, I could talk about that because I think some of the process and the pivot helped build that rapport. And so maybe I'll back up and just kind of explain what the new product. Yeah. So we, in the previous product, we were essentially a chat app, a bot that would communicate with your customers on a very like specific basis. And after the examination, one of the things that we were providing that was really valuable were kind of a biweekly email that we would send to our customers saying, hey, here's categorized, here are the things your customers are asking about. Maybe it's a specific shoe in a specific color and size. Maybe it's a certain question around a particular ski jacket. And that's what they found really valuable, was that information that they could have from their customers. And so, through the pivot, we kind of took a much deeper look at that and kind of looked into and done a lot of research at like voice of the customer. And what we realized was that if you're a business selling anything on something digital or a garment online, you're in receipt of a lot of customer feedback that comes from a variety of different channels. And there's some really great information in that feedback, those conversations, but it's really difficult to extract it because it's not a number that you can necessarily compute. You have to kind of really, requires a human to go in and kind of understand what the sentiment is and do that. So, and the tools to kind of, we saw a gap in the tools to be able to have a non-technical person be able to create a topic that they want to look for and leverage natural language processing and machine learning to go find that. So that's just a little bit of what we do, and what we've. Sorry, there's a helicopter going around. And so we had we built this hypothesis that like, cool, that interests Max and I and the team. Is there a need for that? And so, right around January of this year, we just did this like customer discovery immersion where we asked everybody we knew who could be a potential customer to spend 20 and 30 minutes with us, sometimes face-to-face because that was the thing we used to do, and then sometimes virtually if they weren't available. And we would just kind of run them through a series of questions and try to really just understand what their pain points were. And I think when you get somebody who could be a potential customer, and you just give them a little bit of space to talk about, oh, if you could solve this for me, that would be great. You build this kind of connection. And fast forward a bit, ultimately we decided to look at more of a software market as our customer, specifically B2B SaaS companies, kind of away from e-commerce. We chatted with about 80 different potential customers, built relationships with them. Some wanted it, some didn't, some we weren't quite ready for. And just, our sales tactics were customer discovery, because the info that they could provide would help us build that product. And then when we were ready and we had something built, we could engage with them and get them using the platform and then kind of snowball from there. So I'm really happy to say that like some of our early customers, we keep a cadence where we talk to them on a kind of a bi-weekly, sometimes a lot more. We built really great relationships with some of them that, regardless of what happens to Caravel or anything, want to keep those relationships, much like Alisia said, like become friends and people that you admire. So we just kind of took as human as an approach, and you can do it virtually in this new environment we're all in. It's a little bit more awkward, but if you're introverted like me, maybe it's great. I don't know.
Yeah. It raises a question for me, and I'd love to hear from both of you on this one. How, as a founder, do you find yourself dealing with confirmation bias in this situation? Like, you've made a decision, you have a really good relationship with these folks, and how do you determine what differing viewpoints to kind of bring in so that you have the right path forward, as opposed to just everybody kind of coming together and being like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, we trust you? Like, how do you get those, how do you kind of tease out that kind of information?
That's a good one.
That's a good
Maybe
one.
don't. Maybe you're just like, hey, if people are gonna like it, they like it. Just go with it.
Yeah. Alisia, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I'm thinking, it's interesting. So I weighed quite a few things. I think it was not only like what do my partners think about this, right? Because I also do need, at this point, at this stage, this current stage, it was either, if they're on board, then we can continue to sell their products. But if they're not on board, then I have to go look for additional partners, right? Mm-hmm. So there was that component. There was also the component about the customer. Like, are we meeting the needs of our customers? And at that time, it was still a small number of customers, but still, I was like, are we meeting their needs? And so again, I went back to looking at our data, and looking at, what are some of the products that they were looking for? What are some of their skincare concerns? And how can we help them? And then lastly, again, looking at our overall mission for Glory. And so those were kind of like the three main factors. Well, and then the fourth one, I think, is just like your own instincts, like your gut.
Yep.
Like, what is it telling you to do? And so all of those factors really led us to where we are today.
Cool. That's super helpful. Yeah. Jonathan, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just kind of reminded, I was going back and kind of replaying that process when we were chatting with those early, I wouldn't even call them customers. We were doing customer discovery, but we were just trying to understand there was validation around this new direction we were heading. And a lot of what Alisia said around trusting your gut, I think your gut's going to lead you to really good places. Like, relying on data is critical, but I also feel like if every decision relies on data, then you have to make so many decisions. You're going to spend so much time trying to capture it. So understanding how to filter, like, this should be a data decision versus a gut decision. And one of the things that we did, so when we were doing our customer discovery, we got better at it. And the way that we got better at it was trying to ask more open-ended questions where our customers can kind of lead us into their pain points and see if there was alignment. And when we first started, we maybe came in there with a little bit of bias, like, tell me about this, and do you like this? And I think you get kind of flawed, and you get flawed responses, and it's a whole other kind of practice. But as we got more reps in it, those open-ended questions just gave us different data points as to where to navigate and what to maybe stay away from. But we were also asking very specific questions like, if you're on the phone with a potential buyer or somebody that would be investing in your company as a customer, do you have budget to buy this? And if so, if we did X, Y, and Z, would you buy that? And it's a straightforward question. It's awkward to ask at that stage, in the early stage, but once you ask it, that question of, like, would you buy this? Would you put money? And you can even start to throw dollar amounts. Would you pay $300 a month for something like this if I solved this pain point? Those were really great data indicators for us to kind of remove our own bias, what we wanted, and kind of understand what the pain point was most for the customer, and they would actually pay for it, because at the end of the day, you need that.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and I think that's what I was the kind of detail I was seeking is, like, how do you extract the information that's going to be most valuable to you? Let's see, changing gears just a little bit. This one's super interesting. We've talked a lot about the relationships you had with these folks that you were kind of helping you make the decision about the pivot. Did you engage customers and partners in any other ways, like to help you through the pivot or to communicate it more broadly to the market? Was there anything you did there that was beyond just what a traditional customer or partner relationship might be? And it's okay to say no. I mean,
yeah. No, we didn't. I think, we shared our vision. They gave us feedback. And then we decided to move forward with our pivot. And then we communicated it accordingly, like on all social and our newsletter. And we've done some collaboration with our skincare partners, which actually just was, like, really organic, in that we were starting to get some buzz around the subscription boxes. And so some of our skincare partners thought it would be great to do sort of these, like, Instagram live sessions where we would talk about the subscription box and talk about their products. And but yeah, other than that, no. I mean, for the most part, it was, we just communicated it to them, and then we executed.
Yep. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I think in terms of our communication, I mean, our pivot, I would say, was not a drastic change in mission. It was a bit of a different realignment, but there was a pretty, Caravel of prior to 2020 to now is in some ways kind of a reset. And so I think the story of how we got from that product to this was less important for us to tell. It was more important for us to examine were we making the right call. And we were fortunate to go into the PIE program right around that time that we were pivoting. We got accepted into Techstars on the old product, and before Techstars started, we had to explain that we were went great. Kudos to Isaac and the team there to just say, like, this is normal. And so I wouldn't say we communicated anything. I just think we had a lot of people to talk to about this pivot and communicate with them. And some of them turned into, some of the early customers, we explained what we were doing before and why this was important. They were on board, but we didn't really do too much of an outward, worry too much about the communication because we were almost resetting in some ways.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right, we made it through the questions, and I think I'll bring myself hopefully back up on video. Now is the point in time where we really appreciate all of your insights and feedback, and that's been hugely valuable. Now it's our turn to kind of turn the tables as a community. Bunch of folks here. We're always willing to help the startups in the Portland startup community. Alisia and then Jonathan, what can we as a community be doing to help you right now? What would be most helpful at this time?
Yeah, what would be most helpful is to give us your feedback on your customer experience. So head on over to gloryskincare.com, fill out the skin profile, browse some of our products, and let us know, how we can improve. What would you do differently with the site? And if you could share it with 10 of your friends and family, that would be awesome.
Okay, awesome. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I'll maybe start with an offer. One of the things I think through PIE and Techstars, there's a sense of giving first. And so before I get into what I'll ask, I'll definitely offer. It was so helpful to have people to talk to about any facet of the business that we were going through and pivoting. And so I'll just offer that you can reach me through our website, or I'll share that. If you have questions, I'm just happy to connect with other people in Portland too. I really feel like building a community here.
That's awesome.
Super powerful. So offer that, but also I think from an ask standpoint, if many of you are running a B2B business, software business, and you're in receipt of customer feedback and you want to understand that to improve your products and services, go to our website. You can sign up for a proof of concept, and we can kind of get you onboarded and be an early adopter of Caravel. So that would help us the most right now.
Cool. Awesome. Well, again, thank you both for your time and thoughts and good work kind of working through what can be a very difficult time for many startups, especially in a very difficult time for the world. So, so really good job on doing that stuff. And thanks to everyone for showing up today.